Chris Philp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of her statement. Let us remember that victims are at the heart of this. Young girls, some only 10 years old, were groomed and gang raped by men of predominantly Pakistani origin. Girls like Jane, just 12 years old, when she was raped by an illegal immigrant, when she was found by police, instead of arresting the rapist, the police arrested Jane. Or Anna, only 15 years old, who repeatedly told social workers that she had been gang raped. Instead of helping her, they allowed her to marry her main abuser in an Islamic ceremony. The social worker even attended the ceremony. The ringleader of the Rochdale rape gang, Shabir Ahmed, was actually employed as a welfare rights officer by Oldham Council.
It's not easy to digest the speech I heard in Parliament today. Just think about it. Young girls have been abused for years. The police turn a blind eye, social services go to weddings, and politicians bury their heads in the sand so as not to upset community relations. When did this country ever put the safety of its children before political interests? And people like Starmer either ignored these incidents for years or didn't speak up because they thought it would be racist. A father tries to protect his daughter, and the police arrest the father. What kind of law is this? What kind of justice is this? And then they come out and shamelessly say, we stand with the victims. Do you really think they stand with them? Write in the comments, I'm not going mad on my own, am I? Oh, and by the way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video, because if these truths aren't spoken, they'll be swept under the carpet again.
In another case, a man tried to rescue his young daughter from being raped, but instead of protecting her, the police arrested her dad. I spoke to a mother whose daughter was raped by taxi drivers of Pakistani origin. When she complained to social services, they said that if she dared to raise the matter again, she would lose her daughter. And I spoke to a retired police officer who was himself told by a senior officer at the time to stop investigating abuse by Pakistani origin taxi drivers in Bradford because the police locally did not want to offend Bradford's Muslim community. A former Labour MP, Simon Danchuk, was even told by senior Labour Party figures to stop asking questions in his constituency to avoid antagonising the Muslim community. So these crimes were deliberately covered up by people in authority because so-called community relations were seen as more important than protecting young girls. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a disgrace. Now, the Minister claimed in her statement a moment ago that nothing had been done about this previously, and I don't want to dwell on this, but I will gently remind her that it was the last government that set up the original Rotherham inquiry in 2014, set up the long-running ICSA inquiry, which was much broader but did touch on this, started to collect data on the ethnicity of suspects, set up Operation Soteria to combat sex crimes, and I attended many meetings on that, set up the Grooming Gang Task Force that led to 550 arrests in its first year, I'm glad that's continuing, and introduced legislation to require mandatory reporting, and again I'm glad the government is continuing that work.
Now let's get to this social harmony excuse. What harmony? Children's futures have been ruined, families destroyed, the most vulnerable members of society devastated, and then they come out and say, but the Muslim community will be offended, and the investigation is closed. This is not harmony, this is pure cowardice. Look at Starmer's career. Remember his time as a prosecutor. The man's reflex is always the same. Clash with the powerful, suppress the truth. It's the same story in the Rotherham scandal, in Oldham, in Bradford. It seems that for the political elite, the lives of girls are not worth a few votes in the elections. Now I ask you, if a society cannot protect its own children, how can it survive?
It is clear, however, that much more is needed. But this government has had to be dragged kicking and screaming every step of the way. When the government's rejection of Oldham's call for a national inquiry became public on January the 6th, the Prime Minister disgracefully smeared as, quotes, far right those supporting calls for that proper inquiry. That kind of language It's how these crimes got covered up in the first place. Now, 10 days later, the government partially U-turned and announced local inquiries. And then, on the 16th of June, faced with a parliamentary vote 2 days later, the government finally announced a statutory national inquiry.
Minister.
I thank partially the Shadow Home Secretary for his tone. I'd just like to correct the record. I didn't say that he had done nothing. What I said, that Baroness Casey had said that there had been a decade of inaction of these appalling crimes by previous governments, was exactly what I said. I also answered in my statement many of the questions that he has asked. What I will not do, and his office may have spoken to some of the Oldham victims today. I spoke to some of them personally last night, and so I keep in touch with lots of victims. And what I will not do, what I will never do, is make it so that they are not involved, and it takes time to make sure that this process is completely victim-centred. And I will, frankly, what I will say to him, and I am sure that this is what he and others on his side have written to me about requesting, will want to see that too. And that is the process that we are undertaking. In answer to his question, no local authority area can turn it down. I have said, and the Home Secretary has said a number of times, it is a full, powerful statutory inquiry. And I have to say, I have seen some scaremongering, and victims have written to me.
The details in the stories Chris Phelps recounts are blood-curdling. A social worker attends the wedding of those who forced a girl into marriage. Anyone who covers up such an outrage is an accomplice in my eyes. And the worst part is that for years, this issue has been kept off the agenda by being labelled far-right. Remember, in January, it wasn't Johnson, but the Prime Minister himself who called those demanding a national inquiry far-right. Well, 3 months later, the government accepted the same thing. So, which one is far-right now? What do you think? Don't you think this far-right label is a stick used to silence people?
To say, oh, this won't cover government officials, it won't cover people who covered things up. Absolute nonsense. Let me say and be very clear, and it be taken away by everybody who I'm sure has the victim's best interests at heart, that it will cover what it needs to cover to uncover the truth. And no stone will be left unturned. And that will make difficult conversations for people. And if people are found by our court system to have undermined and had, disgrace in public office, then of course they should be sent to prison. However, that has never happened to date in these cases. And so, of course, I very much hope that we uncover the kind of social workers that he referred to, and I hope that they face the full force of everything that they deserve to face. But there is absolutely nothing that says that anybody can avoid this. It will be up to the inquiry, which is independent and statutory, to look and work with areas about where this will be.
Now, just a minute. Imagine a police officer in this country who wants to investigate the assaults in Bradford, but his superior closes the case saying, "Stop, the Muslim community will be offended." What will this police officer do? Lose his job or his conscience? That is where the state has failed. This system has chosen to protect its own image rather than the children. This is exactly how Starmer and his ilk think. Don't let the image be tarnished. We mustn't lose votes. But in the meantime, Jane, Anna, and hundreds more are losing their lives. Do you think these politicians will be held accountable? Or will it all be swept under the carpet with another big lesson learned statement? Looking at the history of this issue, we see the same cycle. Even when terrorism was discussed in Ireland in the 70s and 80s, the state was clearer. But when it comes to these grooming scandals, they suddenly fell silent, saying, "Careful, mind the culture." What happened that children's lives became so cheap? And now Starmer comes out and says, "We stand with the victims." Sorry, mate, you were part of this system for years. We haven't forgotten whose cases were closed, who was acquitted, and who was left untouched during your time as a prosecutor. Have you forgotten? This is what I'm saying. In these cases, it's not just the perpetrators who need to be judged, but also those who shielded them. Police chiefs, social services directors, local politicians, they all need to be judged. Because the crime isn't just the abuse, the crime is also turning a blind eye. Now the government says, we've launched a national inquiry. Well, that's all well and good, but months have passed, there is still no chairperson, and the scope is still unclear. Don't they ask, is this your sense of urgency? Come on, you spend weeks organising a football league. There are hundreds of victims here, but still, the terms are being prepared. Do you think this is stalling, or is it really a preparation process? What angers me the most is the mentality that still tries to silence the victims. A mother comes forward and reports her daughter. What do social services say? If you speak again, we will take your daughter away. Do you know what this is? A mafia system, not a state. If anyone sees such an outrage and still says it's racism, cultural sensitivity, I have only one thing to say to them. Your sensitivity is not more important than the safety of children. Write in the comments, do you think there is cowardice behind this or a conscious political interest? The issue is this. For years, this country has pursued a policy of image over security. But you can't run a country on image, especially when children's safety is at stake. This government, this opposition, both have failed miserably. To me, it doesn't matter if you're right-wing or left-wing, whoever failed to protect the child is guilty. Starmer's biggest mistake is this. He remained silent for years, and now he's pretending to champion the victims. Sorry, but we're not buying that act. Are you? Let me say one last thing. If this investigation is to be truly independent and robust, it must spare no one. Everyone from the police to social services, from the mayor to the members of parliament must be questioned. Otherwise, this too will turn into a charade, and I know some will be uncomfortable saying it will cause tension in society. But there can be no healing without facing the truth. Children's lives are more valuable than political careers. We must not give up on this issue. If you agree, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let's continue the discussion in the comments. Because if we remain silent, we will experience the same tragedies again.